just introduce yourself and what your sort of platform is?
Yes, I'm Jo Jorgensen, the presidential nominee for the Libertarian Party. And I'm running for president because government is too big, too bossy, too nosy, too intrusive. And the worst part is they usually hurt the very people they're trying to help.
The Republican Party says that they're for sort of limited government. Can you talk about where the Democrats fall short and the Republicans fall short on sort of civil liberties and economics?
They fall short on so many places. So, in fact, my 1996 stump speech when I was the VP nominee was talking about how Republican politicians sold out freedom. And I always make the distinction between the many fine Republican voters and then the Republican politicians who are not giving the Republican voters what they want. And I think we see a perfect example with Trump. You know, the reason that the polls got it wrong is because they weren't looking at people who either had never voted or hadn't voted in 20 years. And finally, they see an outsider. They see somebody who says he's for small government. He says he's a businessman. He's going to balance the budget. He's going to cut spending. And what do we see? We see him act just like any other Republican with the budget getting bigger. And on the other side, Biden, he doesn't even want to cut spending. And on top of that, typically the advantage of the Democratic Party has been that they were the party of free speech and the anti-war party. But we can now see that they're neither of those things, that they, you know, of course, they're the ones leading the way for censorship. And then on top of that, the Democratic Party machine muzzled Tulsi Gabbard and did not let her talk about her anti-war, pro-peace platform on the debate stage. So really, if there was any hope at all for the two-old party system, we've seen that really it's gone. And that's what I'm hearing people say, that it's broken, it's not going to work.
So I tend to focus a lot on activism, kind of what's going on the ground, and of course the last couple of months have been pretty turbulent on that front.
Yes.
I'd love if you could talk about how you feel about sort of what's going on out there, both in terms of the movements themselves, Black Lives Matter, as well as you know, what you would do in terms of police reform if you were the president.
Well, let me start with police reform, because that's pretty easy. I would say the government, the federal government, needs to stop putting itself into local jurisdictions. That crime is a local issue. Assault, burglary, robbery, all of those things are local issues, and it should be among the police, the mayor, the city council, voters, taxpayers, whoever, to decide how they want to run their jurisdiction. And what we've seen is the federal government has been dangling, you know, hanging out. Hey, would you like a free tank? Would you like some grenade launchers? Oh, and guess what? And you know, like the commercials. And that's not all. We'll also give you more money, and we'll give you free training. And so what we have is a federal government militarizing the local police departments. So now instead of acting like, you know, we see on the cop cars, right? Community, serve and protect. Now, instead of having that attitude, their attitude is more of a soldier, you know, us versus them. So that has got to stop. And as president, I would stop handing out tanks. In fact, there was a wonderful little meme circulating about a tow truck backing up with the tank. We're gonna repossess the tanks. Not sure if we can repossess all of them. I'm sure, like everything else, government giveaway literally is a giveaway. But I would definitely stop that. And let me point out, the worst part about this is that if you were to put out a referendum and ask local voters, hey, would you like to increase your property taxes? Would you like an increase in your city taxes so that we can buy a tank for our city? I think most people would say, no, I've got better things to spend my money on. I think I'd rather, you know, go on vacation rather than have you guys take more money in taxes. So that's it for the police. For the Black Lives Matter, and I have been criticized because I have met with Black Lives Matter's leaders, but I would like to point out, it was not with the National Party. Absolutely, the National Party is very Marxist, but what breaks my heart is that we both see the same problem. We both see that we need to end no-knock laws. We need to end middle-of-the-night raids. We need to end qualified immunity. And we need to end these onerous drug laws, which affect the blacks more than the whites. So we need to do all of that. Unfortunately, the National Black Lives Matter unit sees big government as a solution, whereas I see smaller government as a solution. And I just point to, how did we get here in the first place? The one message I like to get across is that we all heard about Rosa Parks, right? The heroic black woman who refused to ride in the back of the bus. What a lot of people don't know is that that was a government-owned, government-run bus. So, and at the time, 60% of the bus ridership were blacks. So only the federal government could discriminate like that without any accountability. Because think about it. What if Uber did that? What if Uber said, we're going to discriminate against our best customers? You know, they'd go out of business as well they should. So once again, it's government causing the problems.
And as president, if a situation like what's happened with George Floyd in the last couple of months came up, right, Trump's response has been to sort of tell municipalities, go really hard on these protesters, and then now he's just started sending in federal troops and sort of taking it into his own hands. How would you handle this?
Well, first of all, and that's what I mean about handing out tanks and grenade launchers, is now they've got an us versus them, and it just ramps up. And my degree is in psychology, and I know that when you have tools like that lying around, it changes your attitude, it changes your mentality. So without all of that, it wouldn't ramp up so much. And also I'd like to point out, there's a big difference between the peaceful protesters who are just exercising their First Amendment right and these opportunists who are hijacking the movement. And oftentimes, and you know, most of us have seen these clips where the protesters are talking to Antifa saying, you know, stop doing that, stop vandalizing it, we're going to get blamed for this, you know, you're not helping us. And so if we could just pinpoint the rioters, not the protesters, the rioters, and bring them to justice and allow people to peacefully protest, we'd be just fine. But once again, we have government lumping groups together and not, which by the way is actually, you know, that's the very definition of prejudice and discrimination, is when you kind of lump people together without looking at specifically what they're doing. So if government were to isolate who's causing the problems, we wouldn't have this.
You mentioned the Antifa. What is your view of the sort of anti-fascist movement?
That they are probably more fascists than even our government, which is really hard to be at this time. That basically they destroy property. They don't have any respect for, it really appears as though they have no respect for life, liberty, or property, and that's the basis of this country.
So sort of switching gears a little bit, if you were elected to be the president, I assume you still wouldn't have a majority Libertarian Senate or House. How would you legislate without really members of your party kind of dominating anything other than the executive branch?
Well, first of all, there is a lot I can do on my own. And the very first thing I would do on the very first day in office would be to start bringing the troops home. As commander-in-chief, I wouldn't have to get permission from them. I wouldn't have to get any laws passed. In fact, right now, we're where we shouldn't be because the laws haven't been passed. So a lot of people don't realize that we spend more on the military than the next 7 countries combined, and we're in almost 150 different countries. We're causing more problems than we're solving. What I want to do is I want to turn America into one giant Switzerland, armed and neutral. So we can do that starting day one without Congress.
And assuming that if you do not become the president, what kind of change are you sort of hoping to create in the next few months, right? There's still a huge platform that you have. What are you hoping to sort of get out of this run?
Well, first of all, I hope that some of the people running for office will take notice and they'll say, and let me back up a minute and say, we are the only party other than the Democrats and Republicans who have been on the ballot in all 50 states in back-to-back presidential elections. And once we did that, they started getting worried, and we already had ballot access problems, they started amping them up even more. So hopefully they see us coming and they see that there's a movement. And you know, I don't expect them to completely change their ways and give us what we're going after, but maybe they'll at least start heading in the right direction. I don't have much hope, but maybe Trump will make good on his promise. That, you know, he starts cutting spending and getting rid of the deficit.
I'm sure you're bombarded with variations of this question, but unfortunately, everybody always asks it.
Of course.
There's this perception that third parties just sort of all that they do is sway the vote from one direction or the other. What would be your case to a voter who has a preference for Trump or Biden? Probably they like you better, but they're worried about voting, against the old parties. What do you say to that voter?
Well, first of all, it depends what state you live in. If you live in a predominantly blue or predominantly red state, then I would say vote for who you want, because your vote doesn't matter. For instance, I live in South Carolina. We're going to go red no matter who's on the ballot. We were one of only 6 states to carry Bob Dole. So we will vote Republican. We as a state will vote Republican no matter what. So if you vote Republican in South Carolina or some of these other red states, you're wasting your vote because the state's going to go red anyway. If you're in a blue state like California, like New York, you're throwing away your vote if you vote for the Democrat, even though you want the Libertarian. So first of all, if you're in any of those states, absolutely vote Libertarian. And also there are 40 million voters out there who lean Libertarian, that if everybody just voted the way that they believed, then we would win by an overwhelming majority.
I think the other major issue that people are talking about right now, of course, is COVID.
Of course.
Where there's both sort of health implications, economic implications, and sort of social ones. How do you approach a national emergency like that from a libertarian perspective?
Well, the first thing Trump should have done, as even not a national emergency, should have gotten rid of the efficacy requirements with the FDA. So the FDA had all these obstacles that were preventing testing kits from getting out. In fact, we had 60 different companies making testing kits, and the FDA only approved 2 of them originally. And meanwhile, we keep hearing in the news how Southeast Asia is how they're keeping the virus under control because they've got all these testing kits. Well, yeah, those testing kits were from our country because we couldn't buy them. So first, get rid of the FDA obstacles. And secondly, Trump was on stage saying, if you don't have symptoms, don't get tested. Meanwhile, we knew that the majority of, we're unclear right now, but at the time the thinking was the majority of people with the virus didn't have symptoms. So that tells me that maybe you should get everybody tested instead of just the ones with symptoms. And last, by the testing, we wouldn't have had to have shut down the economy, and then we wouldn't have lost the tens of millions of jobs because we would know who could go out safely and who needed to stay home. And right now, the last thing is, it's going to be hard to do. I would try to get my money back from the corporations that we simply handed money to. And it's better to keep the money in the hands of individuals and let them decide which companies deserve their money. Me, I would personally rather spend money on my local mom and pop stores than to have my money taken from me and given to the large corporations.
In light of the massive unemployment that did happen, are you supportive of, regardless of corporate welfare, would you be willing to give individual people money the way that it sort of happened with the 1,200 Trump bucks for everybody? Or is that something that you kind of oppose?
Yeah, I very much oppose that. We know very clearly that money in the hands of, let's say, private companies create twice as many jobs as money in the hands of government. And you think about it, that money that the government is handing out, the $1,200, that money has to come from somewhere. And so, it's coming from us ultimately. So rather than having us give it to the government and have them decide who gets it, how about we get to keep it? And there are estimates, we're still waiting for the numbers, but I've heard estimates as high as $15,000, that each $1,200 is actually costing us $15,000 by the time you bring in, all of the middleman stuff as well as the interest and everything like that. But again, that's not a number that I'm going to stick with as my, like on Jeopardy. That's not my final answer. However, I have seen estimates that high, and we'll just have to wait and see how the numbers fall out.
One other question that I've gotten that was sort of related on that idea of basically just the government handing out money to people is someone was pointing out Andrew Yang as a solution to automation, which is another possibility that threatens employment, especially for lower income people. Andrew Yang sort of proposes just giving out money to people. What would be your solution to automation, or other kind of economic factors that lead to unemployment?
Well, first of all, we've had problems. We say problems with automation. I mean, people started saying this a couple hundred years ago when we started. When we started leaving an agrarian society, and we added automation, for instance, to farming, and we went from most of the people being farmers to now we've got the combines out there, and people were saying, oh no, what are we going to do now? People aren't there farming by hand. Now they've got machines doing it. Well, you see how we all found jobs just fine outside of farming. And in fact, look at a lot of the jobs we have now. Look at some of the major companies like Amazon, Google, Facebook. They weren't here 20, 30 years ago. So who knows what companies are going to come about the next 20 or 30 years. And also, again, the money comes from somewhere. In order for the government to give money to someone, they have to take it from someone else. Rather than taking it from someone else, how about that person decides how they want to spend the money and then pay the person to do, whatever work they want done. Again, more jobs are created in the private sector. And if we didn't have government in the way with their regulations, then a lot of people could be working. And the one example I give sometimes is, and because this is just egregious, is hair braiding. Which black women, they know how to braid hair, and and I was told by a Black Lives Matter leader, in fact, he said, this is very cultural to us. And I said, exactly. Right now, in many places, it's illegal for a woman to, let's say, braid her neighbor's hair or braid friend's hair for a cost, for money. Instead, she has to have training, she has to get licensing, and maybe hire a lawyer to get set up as a corporation and so forth. And what's ironic is many of these things, such as hair braiding, such as threading with eyebrows, a lot of times the people that you go get trained from in order to get certified, first of all, they don't even know how to do it, or it's not even, in the training. And secondly, a lot of times they're the competitors. They're already in business. So you, as somebody who wants to start a business, you're having to spend money, you're having to pay money to a big competitor of yours. How is that fair? So if we get a lot of these regulations, then people can get in on the ground floor.
One of the solutions that I hear from on the left, other than using the state to sort of protect workers, is unions. Do you have a particular view of unions or how you would deal with them from your sort of governmental perspective?
I'm completely in favor of people assembling. They have the right to assemble. And in a free market, a group of employees absolutely has the right to get together and make demands on their employer. However, they do not have the right to get help from the government in holding their employer hostage. And yes, voluntary unions can be successful. And one of the examples I point to is the show Friends. A lot of people don't realize that many of there were 6 stars on the show, and many of them were perfectly happy with what they were making. But David Schwimmer and Lisa Kudrow said, you know what? I think we need to be making more money. We need to hold out. And they actually organized their fellow Friends stars and demanded more money, and they got it. So, that's fine. But should government come in and tell, the NBC studios, whoever made it, yes, you have to deal with them and you can't replace them? No, that's absurd.
I think probably lastly, one of the major obstacles, I think, to winning this election is whether or not you're able to be included in the debates.
Absolutely.
I've seen actually that there's some conversations happening right now in the media about whether Joe Biden will even want to participate. I'm sure you'd like to be in the debates with them. Can you talk about what sorts of progress you've made on that? Do you anticipate being able to participate?
We are trying our hardest. We had hope last time. Gary Johnson got to something like 13.6%, and you need to get to 15%. So we got so close. This year, we're really rolling along. In fact, I'm so excited that something like 75% of our volunteers are from outside the party. So we're getting a lot of momentum, a lot of people from outside the party. So we're hoping to break the 15%. And I want to urge anybody watching, if a pollster calls you, to please say, even if you're not entirely sure, say, and I'm not asking you to lie, but if you don't have if you think that maybe I'm your choice, tell them, yes, I'm voting for Jo Jorgensen for president just to get me up to the 15%. Now, once I'm on the stage, if you don't like what I have to say, then you don't have to vote for me, but at least get another voice heard, because right now with the two old major parties, there really is no alternative. The only way to get an alternative voice out there is to get me on the stage.
And so what is your message to that? You said 75% of your the people working with you are not even libertarians themselves, or Libertarian Party members.
Right.
What are your message to, I guess, the Democrat who's just not quite sure they like Joe Biden, the Republican who's just not quite sure about Trump anymore?
Yeah, pretty much what I started off with. If you're a Democrat and you want peace and you're against the war, Joe Biden has shown that he's a war hawk. If you like Tulsi Gabbard's message of let's have peace, let's have a peaceful country, we're the only party out there offering that. And we are the only ones who are out there offering good alternatives to helping people. The other side, on the Trump side, again, I say I completely understand why you voted for Trump. You wanted an outsider. You wanted somebody who was going to come in and change the rules and come in and reduce spending, but all he did was increase it. So, and if you think about it, even though he came in from outside of politics, he's never really had to live under the law much himself anyway. So if you want somebody who has had to live under the laws, who understands that that's how our country is supposed to work, that we go to Washington, spend a few months passing laws, and then go home and live under those laws, if that's the kind of system you want, then definitely vote for me. Vote for me in the election, and also tell any pollster that I'm the one you plan on voting for.
Thank you so much, Jo Jorgensen.
Oh, I thank you. Good to see you.
Good to see you.